like tabletop wargaming? Did you love RTS games? Have you always wanted to build a base and go to war with your miniatures? Well, I did, and that's why I created Little Big War, available now at the link below. This is fast, furious, real-time strategy action on your table. 2 unique factions and a fast-paced activation system that captures the economy of a classic real-time strategy game, all without any cumbersome bookkeeping. And it can be played on your smallest coffee table. And there's gonna be more on that at the end of the video. Check it out. So Games Workshop are suing one of the biggest independent miniature creators on the internet. And while Games Workshop have gone after creators in the past, this time it's different because this independent creator is fighting back and taking Games Workshop to court. And the result of this court case will define the very future of Warhammer, 3D printing, what models you'll be able to buy, and whether or not Space Marines, Eldar, Orcs, and more can be bought from anybody other than Games Workshop. And so the entire Warhammer, miniature, 3D printing, hell, the entire wargame market and community are currently holding their breath. This truly is epoch defining, as we'll find out whether or not the Wild West of 3D printing will finally get reined in, or if independent creators, sculptors, and 3D print artists still have a future in the wargame hobby and on the internet. Oh yeah, this is big. Creative freedom is on the docket. So let's slide back a little, because this story is gonna have massive ramifications for all of us, and I want to make sure that everyone understands just what the hell is going on, and just how massive the stakes really are here. Who is in the right? Who is in the wrong, as well as why this is all happening, because this is some pretty crazy legal stuff, and I do have a legal background. I mean, mostly in clown law, but some other stuff slipped in too. Don't? So on the one hand, we have Games Workshop. They are the owners, and some would say occupiers, of Warhammer, which is an expansive setting that is primarily engaged with by wargamers through their miniature wargames, where people take very expensive, tiny little plastic miniatures, like this Space Marine, then they build them, they paint them, and they never play with them, unless they're very lucky and actually have some friends.
Oh, friend! Oh, new friend!
Which, speaking as someone who plays Warhammer, it's very rare. I don't have a lot of friends.
Oh, friend! Oh, friend!
Now, historically, Games Workshop have been very happy to sick their lawyers on anyone they believe is infringing their IP by maybe creating miniatures that might look a little bit like one of their models. This has become a bit of a problem in the miniature wargame market in general, because there is, in fact, a massive cottage industry online that has sprung up around Warhammer of online third-party creators selling their very own renditions of Space Marines and other Warhammer-inspired miniatures, and often, to be fair, being very obvious about it. Now, these aren't one-to-one copies of existing Warhammer miniatures. Instead, they are often vaguely reminiscent of Warhammer miniatures and designs, and are usually created to be used in games of Warhammer as proxies for the official miniatures. And this industry is really successful, in part because Warhammer models from Games Workshop are, to be honest, very expensive, arguably much too expensive, which is often an argument I make here on this channel. Subscribe if you agree. Yeah, that ought to triple the subscription numbers here. Now, this cottage industry has been around for a really long time, but it's just in the last decade or so that it went from being mostly physical sculpted models made in resin and sold traditionally online and posted out to your address to play with, to instead going digital in the form of 3D printable STL files. This change is important because now, to get these models, anyone at home can simply buy a 3D printer, buy the digital STL files for cheap on one of the many websites dedicated to selling them, and then just print the model in their house with their 3D printer, completely circumventing Games Workshop entirely. And Games Workshop do not like this. They have spoken about it before in court, and their position is that they view every single Space Marine bought from a third-party creator as a missed seal for themselves. And when they were talking about that, they were talking about actual physical miniatures bought in traditional stores. That probably goes triple for every single model that was downloaded and printed. Games Workshop do not like that. They want you to buy Space Marines directly from them. So that's their perspective, and that's the market as they see hate. On the other hand, we have Gamic, flash name Francisco. He is an independent creator and business who has a large store on My Mini Factory and his own website, consisting of what is almost hundreds to possibly even thousands of different miniatures for sale. Gamic has been around for a while. He's one of the OG sculptors for resin 3D printing and part of this digital revolution. And this week he put out a YouTube video stating that Games Workshop are suing him, saying that they have demanded that he delete almost all of the models in his catalog. Now, this isn't unusual for Games Workshop. They do often contact creators directly with legal notices, often demanding that creators remove items from their store that Games Workshop believe too closely resembles Games Workshop's own models, and they use the threat of legal action if those creators do not acquiesce to their demands. Now, usually creators do acquiesce and they stop selling the models in dispute, or they choose to refuse, and Games Workshop simply moves on in response, off to hunt down another offender. It's very rare that Games Workshop actually takes this to a courtroom. However, this time it is different. This time, something almost unprecedented has happened, because this time, when Gamic refused to take down his models, Games Workshop followed through on their threat to take him to court. And where a lot of creators at this point would back down, Gamic has refused. Instead, he has put out a call to action asking for donations from the community via a GoFundMe that's linked below to help him hire lawyers to take Games Workshop on in a courtroom. Something like this has not happened in over a decade. That's like 7 editions of Warhammer 40k. This is a massive inflection point. It's gonna have huge ramifications for the entire hobby, because this is actually an existential danger for 3D printing, as now Games Workshop will finally get to present their position before a judge, and any ruling in this case could destroy home 3D printing. The stakes could not be higher, and the entire market could break. Just like your desk is currently breaking your spine, because our bodies are decaying right before our very eyes. And that leads to all sorts of aches and pains that are made far worse by our desks, because the human body was simply not designed to hunch over all day, every day, whether at work or hobbying on miniatures. Luckily, today's sponsor Flexispot has the solution, because Flexispot's new E7 Pro desk is an affordable and customizable desk that with just a push of a button, you can change its height on the fly. That's right, this is a desk that moves up and down, meaning that if you're having a long day at the table, you can adjust your position as you desire, helping you make sure you're always keeping active. And because the desk is so sturdy, it remains completely stable no matter how high or low you want to go. In fact, the E7 Pro desk even comes with 440 pounds of capacity. That means you could fit an insane amount of miniatures on top of this desk, maybe even a Maximature or two. It's super easy to use with this awesome little touchscreen keyboard that allows you to control the desk and even allows you to charge devices like your phone right at the table. And you can even use it to set height presets to quickly move between standing or sitting at your favorite heights, completely bespoke for you. And that's before we even get into the insane amount of customization options you get for this bad boy, because when you order yours, you can choose the size, the style of wood, the type of table, and a ton of different add-ons. Plus, there's a 15-year warranty and 30 days risk-free return service, so you can order Flexispot with peace of mind. They really are the best in my opinion, so do not delay, because Flexispot is having a mega sale right now and you do not want to miss out. Visit Flexispot.com and use my code YTE730 to get an extra $30 off and get your very own E7 Pro standing desk, or if you're on a limited budget, the E7. There is a link in the description below. You gotta click that, get over there now. You owe it to your decaying body to give it the gift of a Flexispot desk. And thanks to Flexispot for sponsoring today's video. Okay, so we first found out about this when Gamic created a YouTube video claiming that Games Workshop contacted him to order that he take down a number of offending models from his online My Mini Factory web store. Now, in and of itself, that's not unusual. Games Workshop do this a lot. They have contracted legal firms to contact third-party sculptors who they believe are infringing on their trademarks and threaten legal action against those sellers in order to get them take down down their models in the past. However, usually when Games Workshop does this, they are very specific about what models they think infringe on their trademark and what models they want creators to take down and no longer sell in future. This time, however, Gamek claims that Games Workshop did not provide a list of the offending miniatures, and instead they wanted him to essentially delete his entire library of thousands of models that he has for sale on his My Mini Factory store, even after he had a dialogue and reached out to them back and forth trying to ascertain what was exactly the problem and what they wanted to go. So Games Workshop weren't being clear, or rather, I guess they were. I guess they wanted a clearance sale and everything must go. According to Gamek, Games Workshop essentially were ordering the oblivion of his entire business. And that is, to be honest, a big ask. However, that's only Gamek's position. What about Games Workshop? Well, they are making allegations against Gamek that they presumably believe justify this drastic action. So what are those claims? Well, now that this is all going to court, we can see exactly what's being alleged by Games Workshop. According to court documents provided by Gamek, Games Workshop are making a few different claims. Their first is that Gamek models have infringed Games Workshop trademarks and IP. And their second claim is that Gamek is engaged in unfair competition with Games Workshop. Now, it feels like many online already believe that Games Workshop have an obviously strong case to make against Gamek. After all, if we compare many of the miniatures that Gamek sells against many of the miniatures that Games Workshop sell, the Gamek models do look, on the face of it, to be very obviously similar. And in my opinion, it is kind of obvious to me that many of the miniatures sculpted by Gamek were probably designed to be used as alternative proxies, as alternative models to Games Workshop's own miniature range for games of Warhammer 40k. I mean, come on, you know, like these two models, yeah, they're as similar as the twins in The Shining. No, not those twins. I'm talking about these twins. Nice. And that's where a lot of people on the internet have stopped and decided that Games Workshop are in the right, and that's the end of things. Gamek must pay. However, at the risk of being called a hater, I'm not so convinced, because Games Workshop's allegations are very specific. Like, for example, their claim that Gamek is engaged in unfair competition. But what does that actually mean? Because this is a very specific legal claim in the legal jurisdiction of Italy where this court case is taking place. And I'm not an expert in Italian law, but I talk a lot with my hands, and I've watched every single season of The Sopranos, so I kind of am an expert. And according to Article 2598 of the Italian Civil Code of 1942, wonder what was going on in Italy in that year. There are a number of elements that need to be satisfied for a claim of unfair competition to be true. Namely, Games Workshop need to show that Gamek is using names or distinctive signs of Games Workshop, or slavishly imitating their miniatures, or performing actions in a way that is likely to cause people to confuse Gamek's products with that of Games Workshop. In other words, here is the question for the court. Is Gamek passing off his models as if they were official Warhammer 40k models, or are people likely to confuse his miniatures with the official miniatures, or is he even imitating their products entirely? And, well, personally, I don't think so. For one, Gamek doesn't use any Warhammer logos or brands or symbols in his models that I have seen. He does have a lot of models, but, you know, I've looked at a lot of them, and as far as I've seen, this is about as close as it gets. He also doesn't write anywhere that his miniatures are official Games Workshop miniatures, or use any Games Workshop logos in the descriptions of his models. In fact, he doesn't even mention Warhammer 40k on the description of any of his miniatures that I've seen. Instead, he markets his models as being compatible with a completely different game called Grimdark Future from One Page Rules. But that said, it's clear that many of the Gamek models are obviously based on existing Games Workshop miniatures, right? I mean, clearly he is engaged in unfair competition by imitating Games Workshop's products. Well, even that's not so clear to me. Like, for example, here are the Trencher models from Gamek. Now, many people online claim that these are obviously infringing on Games Workshop's copyright because of their apparent similarity to the Deathcore Krieg model range for Warhammer 40k. And yeah, At first blush, putting them side by side, there's a lot of similarities here. These are evoking the same vibe. However, when you examine these models, I think things get a lot more complicated, because these trencher miniatures, unlike the Death Corps of Krieg, are wearing the iconic pickle hubs of German World War I soldiers. That is a very different helmet from the Krieg helmets, which resemble more of a French Adrian helmet from World War I mixed with a German style helm. And when we get down to it, I mean, the trenchers are just gas mask wearing soldiers in a bizarre combination of World War I-esque era looking uniforms. And also, that's just kind of what the Krieg are too. And that is a very generic idea. It's not Games Workshop specific. So it's easily arguable, in my opinion, that it's not that the trenchers look too much like the Krieg, or that they are slavishly imitating them. It's more the case that the Krieg are just a very generic archetype that lots of creatives have a spin on. And that goes for most of the Warhammer range, if we're honest. Games Workshop have cast very wide creative nets after decades in the industry, producing hundreds of thousands of miniatures, many of which themselves were copied from other sci-fi and fantasy settings and archetypes. I mean, okay, look at these Obliterator models from Gamak. I mean, these are just space guys in heavy knight armor with helmets that, if anything, look a bit like Power Ranger helmets. I mean, can Games Workshop really claim that these are slavishly imitating their own Space Marine models? I mean, sure, both Games Workshop and Gamak are playing in the same sandbox, but Games Workshop in this instance are acting like they invented sand. But they didn't even put the sandbox there. It was created long before them by people like Murkoch, Tolkien, and Frank Herbert. I mean, just look at their model range and then watch any amount of media from the 80s and 90s and you'll spot it instantly. Wow, a lot of these official Games Workshop models sure are familiar, aren't they? Look, it's just an Englishman. So yeah, rather than being imitations, arguably Gamak is creating entirely new pieces of art that's been inspired by many different fantasy worlds, just like Games Workshop. Skeletons, orcs, zombies, dwarfs, spacemen with laser guns, alien bugs, space knights, giant stompy robots, the entire concept of chaos. None of these are inventions of Games Workshop. They've existed for much longer in books like Starship Troopers, Lord of the Rings, Dune, and more. I mean, Warhammer 40k is just Lord of the Rings in space by way of Dune. And I'm not criticizing Games Workshop creatives for having been inspired by other media and their own sci-fi and fantasy worlds. And I'm not saying that Warhammer isn't an awesome, imaginative, and fun setting. But what I am saying is that if we applied Games Workshop's own standards of what is infringement to their own models, then they'd have been sued out of existence a long time ago. Probably by this guy. Their legal position is a hypocritical one, and in fact, this is a point that Gamak is claiming in court. He states that his lawyers are arguing that, quote, Games Workshop is not able to demonstrate the distinctiveness of their models because the signs, elements, shapes present in Gamak models draw from imaginary universes over which Games Workshop has no exclusive rights. In other words, Games Workshop, they were inspired by Dune? Oh, well, so was I, as it happens. I guess it's inevitable that we both arrived at the same place. And that's a pretty inspired defense. And to be fair, it's not outrageous. I mean, everyone is inspired by works that came before, all the way back to the ancients. I mean, the Odyssey is just a high fantasy version of the Iliad, and the Very Hungry Caterpillar is just a modern reimagining of the Epic of Gilgamesh. And as an aside, as it happens, it's kind of funny to me that Gamak advertises all his models as being compatible with one-page rules. But one-page rules is a fast-paced wargame rule set that was originally designed to be played with Warhammer 40k miniatures. So if someone were to design miniatures for one-page rules, well, it's hard not to end up with significantly similar combinations of weapons and loadouts, and even archetypes that Warhammer has. I mean, if you look at the original Battle Brothers miniatures for one-page rules, they look like this. So if Gamak is creating miniatures for one-page rules, I mean, it's kind of inevitable that the models are gonna look vaguely similar with Warhammer 40k models, and arguably he's more engaged in unfair competition with one-page rules themselves. It's a good thing that one-page rules isn't following in Games Workshop's footsteps. But all that said, the argument that Gamak is relying on is one that many creators in the 3D print space rely on too. I mean, many creators would say that their models are unique pieces of art that do not infringe on Games Workshop copyright, even if they may have some vague similarities similarities or even some very unvague similarities. So if Gamic's lawyers make this argument in front of a judge and it's found to not be true according to the court, that Gamic goes too far and that his models are imitating Games Workshop miniatures, then that could be devastating to the 3D print market and put a massive chunk of creators out of business, because Gamic is not unique and not alone in making models that look very similar to existing Warhammer miniatures. In fact, much of the 3D print wargame market derives a lot of its income from sales of what are in reality Space Marine proxies. Let's just admit it, if you go onto any 3D print website, you'll find models that are clearly designed to be used in place of official Games Workshop models or as Space Marines in alternative versions of Warhammer. And if Games Workshop win this court case, then it will set a precedent that drastically widens the scope for who they will feel comfortable going after in future. And that could mean that we will lose hundreds of thousands of miniatures and 3D files and creatives as websites like My Mini Factory and Cults 3D seek to restrict any sales of models that could potentially put their websites under threat of legal action from Games Workshop for hosting them, forcing those websites to delete all potential proxies for Warhammer 40k. So let me say that again. This case implicates any and every sculptor who makes proxies for Warhammer, and that will have a huge knock-on effect to the rest even of the physical war game market, because tons of games are just basically games that are meant to be Warhammer but better and designed to be played with Warhammer miniatures or, more often, Warhammer proxies. So this is going to affect everyone that 3D prints models or just simply play war games, because if Games Workshop win this case, it's just going to do nothing but hurt gamers. It will hurt the entire war game market. There'll be less money in sculpting, which means less people creating miniatures, which means less variety in the marketplace, and also, importantly, there's going to be way less people who can even afford to play games, because this cottage industry did not spring up for no reason. This is a gap that Games Workshop have left in the market as a result of their own actions. I mean, whether or not you are the biggest lover or the biggest hater of Games Workshop, I think everyone would admit that they have left themselves susceptible to this type of third-party market because of their business model. It's inarguable that Games Workshop set the price of Warhammer extremely high, to the extent that it's mostly unaffordable to a large amount of people, which forces those people who cannot afford it to turn to more affordable avenues. If Games Workshop sold their miniatures at a lower price, the market for these alternative sculpts would be much smaller. And you can see that. The third-party markets for Warhammer are way bigger in places like Brazil, Mexico, and New Zealand, where Warhammer is hard to get or just extremely expensive. But because it's kind of expensive everywhere, there's going to be a global market for these things. And if Games Workshop win this case, that's going to go away. There's going to be less options, less competition, and less people able to play Warhammer or afford to buy into Warhammer, or even afford to buy models to use in games like Firefight or One Page Rules Grimdark Future or Roguehammer that rely on similar ideas of factions and minis. Hell, people create terrain that's designed to be compatible with Warhammer 40k. So are they going to be in the crosshairs next? Are they taking away from official Games Workshop brutally overpriced plastic terrain? Are they slavishly imitating ruins used in Warhammer maps? I mean, this is really bad for the entire market, and it's going to really restrict creative freedoms. It's going to prevent us from getting miniatures that we want. It's going to reduce the amount of things that can be sculpted. It's going to hurt artists. It's going to hurt games. This is really bad, you guys. And of course, yes, a loss here will devastate Gamic's business utterly as well, and it really does seem like Games Workshop wants his entire store pulled down, which is a lot of minis. However, to be a little bit selfish here for a second, I'm kind of glad that this is happening. I hate to say that, but as someone who has been covering Games Workshop legal tomfoolery for a while now, I'm really glad to see someone take them on in a courtroom. I mean, obviously, this is very expensive for Gamic and a big threat to his business, and of course it is a threat to the entire 3D print market. But Games Workshop have been using the threat of legal action as a cudgel against the third-party market so frequently and violently in the last few years, shutting down different creators by threatening legal action, that I'm almost just glad that we're finally going to get this in front of a judge so we can get some clarity and get it all sorted out once and for all. Can Games Workshop do this? Can they make these claims? Because to be honest, this case is also incredibly dangerous for Games Workshop too. So, you know, get ready to potentially short their stock, I guess. Because remember, Gamek's lawyers' arguments are actually kind of clever. They're designed to completely undermine Games Workshop's rights to many of the copyright claims and symbols and models that GW believe are exclusive to Warhammer. Because Gamek's lawyers are saying that Games Workshop models aren't distinctive, and if that argument wins in court, then it means the Games Workshop will completely lose their ability to threaten legal action against other creators over any similarity to their own models, because their models are generic, they're not distinctive. I can make whatever I want based on the Warhammer 40k model range, and that would be devastating to Games Workshop. I don't think people appreciate just how big a deal this could be. If they lose, they're kind of fucked. And it bears remembering, if you don't know, this has happened before. There was previously a case of this magnitude for Games Workshop 13 years ago. This was the infamous Chapter House trial. I've covered this trial on the channel. It's a very similar case where Games Workshop took a smaller creator to court alleging that they were infringing on Games Workshop copyrights. And like Gamek, Chapter House, which was the smaller business, had a similar argument in court. Namely, that Games Workshop don't own the rights to many of the designs that Games Workshop sell. In fact, during the Chapter House trial, Games Workshop dropped a whole boatload of their claims midway through the proceedings over specific models because Chapter House showed that many of the miniatures that Games Workshop claimed were theirs had actually been created and were owned copyright-wise by freelancers, and those freelancers still retained the rights to them. That was a big oof for Games Workshop, and FYI, that's also why they do not credit their creatives anymore. It's because Chapter House used those credits to go back and look and see who made all the stuff that makes up Warhammer. But I digress, though I would say, Gamek, if your lawyers don't know about Chapter House, you might want to get them to look into that. But Chapter House is especially notable, and it's super relevant here because Games Workshop arguably lost that trial overall. I mean, sure, they did win some of their claims in the court, and Chapter House was forced to go out of business because of the legal fees incurred defending themselves in court. But Games Workshop lost a lot of their arguments, and the court found that many of the things they claimed were specific to Warhammer were in fact generic. That's why so many Warhammer factions had name changes in the 2010s. We lost Imperial Guard and gained Astra Militarum. The Eldar became Eldari. The Orcs were fine because they were spelled with a K. But it really didn't go the way the Games Workshop thought it would, and it resulted in massive changes to Warhammer. And now it looks like they're facing a Chapter House 2 electric boogaloo. Because if they lose here, their future threats of legal action will feel a lot weaker. I mean, they might not even do it as much, and 3D printing will likely proliferate a lot more. And hell, it might come out in the case that actually what Games Workshop believe are specific to their IP, like their Space Marines, are actually entirely generic models. So this really is an existential fight for both Games Workshop and Gamek. I can't overstate just how huge this is. But I keep wondering, there is a bit of a worry at the back of my mind. Usually Games Workshop back off at this stage, so why not this time? Why are they going to court? What do they know? I mean, this could ultimately just be a tactical decision to try and force Gamek out of business by forcing him to incur ungodly legal fees, which is something that major corporations like to do against small creators. But if that's the case, Games Workshop might be in for a nasty surprise, because at time of writing this video, Gamek's legal GoFundMe is sitting at 38k euros, and it's growing. So he definitely seems to have the support of a large portion of the community. So it looks like this is all going to end in court, and we'll have to see what the court says. But in the meantime, the entire 3D print industry is holding its breath. And I will continue to follow it, so subscribe to my channel to keep up, check out my Patreon to help support my coverage here, or check out my brand new miniatures game, Little Big War, the definitive base building tabletop war game that you can play on a coffee table. Yes, finally, base building in a war game, and I actually made it work. It's really good. You start with infantry and little goo guys, then you end the match with massive tanks, cyclopean monsters, star gods, and nuclear bombs. It's awesome. You can buy it right now. You see my link in the description below. Click it. It's super easy to play, super short and easy to read, comes with vibrant, pretty art, and best of all, it's incredibly affordable at under £6 or $8. The game is designed to be accessible and playable by everybody, so check it out. I'm really proud of it. I think it's a ton of fun, and the more people that pick it up means the more future content I can create for the game. I just figured we really need an RTS game, war game. Why does that not exist? Well, now lie, it does. Check it out. And thanks to everyone for your support, especially to my patrons. Thanks a lot, CryptoKev, and I'll catch you all next time. Bye-bye.